116 players entered. We are left with only 8. What's up, everyone? My name is Dakota, and I'm bringing you the recap of the MTG World Championship Top 8. An absolutely exciting tournament, all culminating on Sunday, where we are finally going to crown the world champion of Magic the Gathering. Of course, before we get too deep into the recap and we talk about what happened this weekend and we crown a world champion, you know, you subscribe to the channel and you want to see more videos from me, where we post mainly about the modern and pioneer content, definitely getting into standard because the standard format is sweet, or any other longer form videos, please consider subscribing and ring that notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. It's a free, easy way to support me and my content. If you go down in the description below, there's a few links. There's one goes to my Discord server. Feel free to join over there. And the other one to our sponsor of the channel, Mana Traders, where you can use their subscription-based service to end up renting whatever cards that you really want to rent on Moto and play in either the challenges or playing in leagues, even in their free tournament series that they put on every month, where you have a chance to qualify for their invitational and win real prizes. So if any of that interests you, please consider following those links. Follow the link in the description down below for Mana Traders. If you sign up, you end up getting 5% off of your monthly subscription with my link down there. So definitely something to consider. And with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at our world's top 8 here. So we have some storylines going into Sunday. Of course, this is kind of the important things to look at. The biggest one, arguably the biggest one, the possibility for a 2-time world champion. We have Kai Budde, who won it in 1999. We had Seth Manfield, who won it in 2015. And Javier, who I believe ended up winning in 2018, becoming the world champion. There is a lot on the line here. This could only be the second time, assuming one of those 3 players wins, it would only be the second time in Magic history that we have a 2-time world champion. So definitely something to keep an eye on there and to keep in the back of your head as we kind of go through these different matchups. Next, we have Javier versus Manfield for Player of the Year. Now, both of these players going into it, they were not the points leader. Simon Nielsen, it was essentially his trophy to lose. If Simon could win, make the top 8, win the quarterfinal matchup, it didn't matter what happened. He could get 3-0'd, he could get chucked into the sun, whatever the case may be, he would still be Player of the Year. So, something to keep in mind there. Obviously did not make the top 8, or at least maybe spoilers, he didn't make the top 8. He ended up getting 26th place, leaving Javier and Seth Manfield to fight for the title. Now, if they both get knocked out in the same round, Manfield ends up winning it. He has 3 more points than Javier going into the top 8. If Manfield at any point loses, or if either player wins it, then that player is going to win the Player of the Year trophy. So definitely something to watch there as we kind of go down to the last few rounds of this season to decide who is going to be the Player of the Year. Thirdly, can Kai turn back the clock? Can we see vintage Kai Budde, the German juggernaut? Can he finish on Sundays? That was the moniker for years and years. And I tell you what, still not an easy opponent to play if you have to sit across from him. Absolutely ruthless. And he is going to go out and try to do whatever he can to end up winning his match and securing not only his legacy as the best player of all time, but just make that resume even harder to top. And it certainly will be harder to top if he's only the second 2-time world champion, with all of his Pro Tour top 8s, with all of his Worlds top 8s, with all of just everything from top to bottom on the resume would make it nearly impossible to top. Finally, can Marcio Carvalho finally win a world title? This is his 3rd finals top 8, or excuse me, his 3rd world championship top 8, excuse me. He's made it to the finals twice in those top 8s. An insane conversion rate, honestly, to making it to the finals. Only to lose to players like Brian Braunduin and Paulo Vitor Damarosa. 2 great players at the time in their own right. Probably still 2 really good players now even. But Marcio is out and looking for that first world title. He wants a taste of winning the championship. He knows what it means to get there, and he definitely knows the feeling of losing at this point. But can he turn it around and he be the person holding up the trophy instead of watching somebody else hoist the title? We have our top 8 bracket here. 1 versus 8, Seth Manfield, Kai Budde, Golgari Ramp versus Dimir Midrange. We have Hafam versus Javier Dominguez, a rematch of the Swiss rounds where Hafam actually beat Javier Dominguez. Quinton Oli, Max Rappaport, Monored Aggro, definitely the unicorn deck of this top 8. People were expecting Gruel Prowess, which we actually see Yoshihiko Akawa playing against Marcio Carvalho. But Monored Aggro has definitely been kind of the story of the tournament. Quinton Oli is the number 2 seed playing against number 7 Max Rappaport. And Marcio Carvalho being the 3rd seed playing against Yoshihiko Akawa, the 6th seed, playing Gruel Prowess, Golgari midrange. Marcio definitely having a little bit of an advantage there, getting to be on the play versus Gruel Prowess. But Yoshihiko Akawa is definitely no pushover, and it is not going to be easy for Marcio Carvalho here in the quarterfinals. Really, for a lot of these players, I mean, looking at just the 1 through 8, Seth Manfield has to play against Kai Budde. If he wants to win the Player of the Year, he has to beat the person that the trophy is named after. Is absolutely insane. Again, storybook writing here if Kai Budde can actually knock off Seth Manfield, who's been absolutely on fire all weekend. Javier Dominguez, if he wants to become a repeat world champion, he has to conquer his demons, metaphorically and literally, against Fam, who again, like we had just previously stated, had actually beaten Javier in the quarterfinals. And Quinton Oli, again, just trying to keep the dream run of just showing that Mono Red has still got something in the tank. While Yoshihiko Akawa, Marcio Carvalho showing that some of the pillars of the standard format that were, expected to be played going into the tournament continues to kind of dominate the tournament and show why they were some of the most played decks going into this weekend. But with all that said, we've seen the bracket. Let's go ahead and take a look at our first matchup, which if anyone was even surprised, then I would say you weren't really paying attention to anything that's happened in competitive Magic, because the very first match that we got to see in the feature match of the quarterfinals was Seth Manfield versus Kai, the German Juggernaut Budde. What better way to start off than with Seth Manfield versus Kai Budde, the German Juggernaut versus the current Player of the Year points leader. This was, like I said in the beginning, we knew that this was going to be the feature match. Wherever Kai was going to be, that's where we were going to go, and that's exactly where we're going here. Having to play against Seth Manfield, who is the number 1 overall seed, qualified, I believe, in round 11, ended up being 10-1, which meant that he got the last 3 buys over the course of the weekend to just kind of cruise into the top 8 and just let everything else shake out and figure out who he's going to play. And I tell you what, being the 1 seed, I've never felt so bad about being the best player in the room, about having the best record in the room, because you got to play against Kai, who maybe at times people are like, oh, maybe he can't, maybe he's done, whatever the case may be, and still absolutely dazzles people with how he's able to play the game. Absolutely amazing. And like we said in the beginning, would be an absolute fairy tale ending if Kai is able to kind of take on Seth Manfield and, kind of maybe in some irony with Seth playing for the Kai Budde Player of the Year award, actually losing to the award, or, losing to the man that is named after the award. That's absolutely insane. But of course, we've played the match and everything, and I think it ended up feeling pretty close, really up until it wasn't. And unfortunately for us, Seth Manfield ends up winning 3-1 in pretty dominating fashion, all things considered. Kai just has to settle for a world's top 8. Unfortunately, killing our first storyline really before anything gets off the ground. But, Seth Manfield is a very accomplished player in his own right. This was, he's a great player. The fact that Kai is also an all-time great and probably the all-time great in Magic, having to play against one of the best players currently playing Magic, and definitely held his own. Just maybe if things break a different way, Kai ends up moving on to the semifinals, where he would have to play against either Fam or Javier Dominguez. So the potential in the semifinals, currently even now, to have a former world champion versus another former world champion. And now with Seth Manfield advancing, we could potentially see the Player of the Year race end in the semifinals and figure out, Player of the Year for 2024 and a potential rematch if Javier is able to take down Fam and metaphorically conquer his demons and beat the player that actually beat him in the Swiss. So we move on. We move on to the next matchup in the same side of the bracket. Fam, Javier Dominguez. We've pointed it out before. This is essentially a mirror match, only in name. It was said on stream where the Javier's version of Dimir Demons is the more combo-based version, where we have Doomsday Excruciator, who is going to end up, exiling all but 6 cards from each player's library and then Jace is going to come down and finish off the game. There's also the blue-black creature land where you can mill your opponent for 4 cards. So if you get in about 2 attacks with that, or if they have their own Unholy Annex going, whatever, there's a few different avenues to where you can mill your opponent out after playing a Doomsday Excruciator, before the Excruciator makes you draw too many cards and end up losing the game yourself here. Hafam won the Swiss matchup between these two. And even on coverage, it was kind of funny where I think by all conventional wisdom, you kind of give the nod to the players like, okay, well, Hafam ended up winning this matchup in the Swiss, so why not pick him to win in the top 8? But in a best of 5 series against Javier Dominguez, who at this point hadn't finished worse than 10th in a premier level event. That is absolutely wild to think that Javier has been that dominant. I think overshadowed by Simon Nielsen, overshadowed by Seth Manfield, who ended up winning a Pro Tour and, of course, topping another one. Javier being in multiple top, just being around there. We're going to the last round, like Javier's kind of on the cusp of making top 8, or in at least giving himself a chance to be a threat to win the whole tournament. So I think against conventional wisdom, maybe, or whatever the case may be, we had Javier Dominguez, Hafam, and people were picking Javier to win this, even though he had lost the matchup previously. And you know what? Turns out experience rules above all. Javier winning 3-1 and getting that metaphorical reprieve, having that, the demons being conquered, because Javier ended up just going in, executing his game plan, and with a few missteps from Hafam in the closeout game, Javier ends up cruising to a 3-1, and we have not only the Player of the Year award on the line in the semifinals of the World Championship, but we're going to be sending at least one former world champion, just one former world champion, to the finals of a World Championship to give them another title potentially, to, again, join the ranks of Shahar Shenhar as the only multi-time world champion. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. We have to finish out the quarterfinals here. The next matchup we have is Marcio Carvalho versus Yoshihiko Ikawa. Gogori mid-range on Marcio's side, Gruul aggro on the other side. This is kind of what we expected when we went into this tournament. Again, before we actually got the metagame breakdown, we were expecting to see Gruul aggro versus Gogori mid-range. Obviously, Gruul aggro being probably pound for pound one of the best decks, and I can only say that because there's no way Heartfire Hero or Emberheart Challenger weigh even like a tenth of a pound, probably combined. But, they hit insanely hard here. Gogori midrange argued as probably one of the best answers to Gruul aggro, so definitely an uphill battle for Yoshihiko Ikawa, but obviously being Gruul aggro, if you don't just immediately fold to Gogori midrange, and Gogori midrange has to have plenty of removal, and a lot of times you can put them in a sticky situation where they're still going to be taking tons of damage from cards like Heartfire Hero, Emberheart Challenger, and many of the other red creatures that we see in these Gruul aggro decks. So definitely maybe an uphill battle for Yoshihiko Ikawa, but definitely not impossible. Marcio also having a very great tournament overall. I believe being the 3rd seed in this, so getting to be on the play against Ikawa is definitely going to help when the aggro deck can't actually establish its footing necessarily the way that it wants to, in the sense that it wants to be able to curve Heartfire Hero into the 2-mana mouse to give a double strike and end up just dealing with hitting your opponent for a bunch of damage, and again, just continuing to punish your opponent for not getting rid of the Heartfire Hero and just kind of letting it sit on the battlefield, accumulate counters eventually before it gets thrown at your opponent. But Marcio is the absolute professional that he is. Yoshihiko Ikawa, again, Pro Tour Outlaws of Thunder Junction champion, playing a deck that is completely the opposite of what he won a standard Pro Tour with, deciding to come in with the best deck, and it was going to be for naught, as Marcio ends up taking the match 3-2, 5 very close games. Marcio is kind of, honestly, I really liked the Gogori mid-range kind of deck coming into it. I think it was just very consistent. Obviously, you can kind of expect Gruul aggro to be the most played deck, so why not play something like a Gogori mid-range, one of these big mid-range decks that can put on a relatively fast clock. With Mosswood Dread Knight and Archfiend of the Dross here on your screen, these do close out games very quickly and ultimately can just shut the door on your opponent. That's kind of the name of the game with mid-range decks. Before, they would kind of give you like 3 or 4 or 5 turns maybe before you could really kind of close out the game. And with Archfiend of the Dross, Mosswood Dread Knight, you're playing Archfiend, you're forcing your opponent to have to play creatures to either try to block it or try to race, and then you can use your removal spells to kind of clean up those creatures. They end up losing some life, they get chunked for 6. There's just kind of a winning recipe there. Archfiend of the Dross has definitely been one of the main creatures and probably one of the best creatures in the tournament so far, as far as like all the other deck lists have been concerned. Now Marcio needs an opponent. Quintonoli, Max Rappaport. Mono red aggro. Not necessarily the red aggro deck people expected. Again, I think Gruul was the most expected deck to be played in this tournament, and Quinn just decided that I'm not going to mess around with Copperline Gorge. I'm not going to mess around with Karplusian Forests or any of this other stuff. I'm just going to play mountains. I'm going to play rock face villages, and I'm going to go to the face and just absolutely hit in with these Heartfire heroes, these slick shot show-offs. Come in with my burn spells. It's going to help against some of these other creature decks to be able to push through damage while also being able to go to the face with said spells and absolutely rack up the damage here. On the other side, Dimir midrange. We saw Kai Buddha playing a Dimir midrange deck. His is a little bit different because he was playing Kaito and some of this other stuff, and you kind of get some card advantage with Kaito. Plus, a 3/4 attacker is relatively large. Of course, getting to kind of, re-up on your Deep Cavern Bats and, these potentially other things. We saw, like, Stormcaller Siren or whatever it is to, like, make a map token when it enters, and then you attack with it, and you ninjutsu in the Kaito, then you kind of get to make another map token, and that's like a way that you can generate card advantage, on top of having Enduring Curiosity as well. So definitely a little bit worse, I would say, for maybe Dimir midrange. Deep Cavern Bat, like, obviously great. It's a life-linking threat, and if you're able to kind of get some cards going, you have some really good removal in the Dimir mid-range deck. Maybe it's more of an uphill battle for mono red aggro, but the way Quinn's been playing, the number 2 seed overall, absolutely just kind of slicing and dicing the competition, not losing a game, or not losing a match, in Standard. It's kind of hard to go against the higher seed. Mono red aggro on the play is some of the most threatening words that you can hear, aside from, hey, what's your life total? Those can be like 2 very sickening sentences. And, it wasn't even close. Quinn wins 3-0, Heartfire Hero and Slickshot Show Off breaking out the brooms. We have a sweep, kind of a change of pace from a lot of these close matches being played. Quinn just said, let's get it done and dusted and over with. We're going to, put you in the dustpan, throw you in the garbage can. Sorry, Max, this is not your tournament. Quinn is the main character in this part. So then we have our semifinals. Here on the left, you have kind of how the matches ended up going. And we have in the semifinals, Seth Manfield versus Javier Dominguez, and Quintonoli versus Marcio Carvalho. This is an insane top 4. Quinn playing probably one of the, I would consider the breakout deck of the tournament, right? I don't think anybody expected just a straight mono red aggro. I think Gruul Prowess was definitely the deck people were expecting. Mono red aggro, not so much. We have him going up against Marcio Carvalho, who has come with a vengeance, trying to finally capture a world title after being just so close and just out of reach every other time that he has been here. And the other side of the bracket, whichever player between Quintonoli and Marcio Carvalho make it to the finals, they probably have an arguably even harder challenge to deal with, as they have to play against either Seth Manfield, Javier Dominguez, both former world champions, both Pro Tour champions. And finally, one of them is going to be Player of the Year after this. It doesn't matter. Now, it doesn't matter if between Seth or Javier, whoever wins makes it to the finals. Whoever wins in this is going to have more points than the other person and is going to win Player of the Year, effectively stealing it from Simon Nielsen, who again looked like the odds-on favorite after having a super dominant year, stumbling at the finish line and leaving the door open for Seth Manfield and Javier Dominguez. No pun intended there, because, we are featuring Duskmourn, and there's a lot of doors in Duskmourn. And it turns out one of those doors is fear of losing the Player of the Year championship. But before we get to probably one of the more anticipated matchups, we have to talk about Quintonoli versus Marcio Carvalho. Because going into this, Quinn is obviously the higher seed. Mono red aggro gets to be on the play against Golgari midrange. Now, Golgari midrange, has the tools to kind of handle the Gruul Prowess decks. And I think the Gruul Prowess decks might be a little bit more annoying because there is sometimes where they kind of play out their threats and then you try to kill it and you need 2 removal spells to essentially deal with 1. And in some of the cases, some of the creatures that you end up dealing with in like the mono red deck and the Gruul Prowess deck end up just dealing you damage anyway when you kill them. So you just need some very specific answers to kind of deal with some of the negatives or all the negatives you get with kind of destroying these creatures. Mono red makes no exception. Heartfire Hero, Slick Shot Show Off, burn spells, and just the fact that you can pile on tons and tons of damage early. And then, again, being on the play, if Quinn wins this, and say Javier or somebody, if Seth wins out of his pod, I'm not even sure Seth being on the play helps against mono red aggro. This mono red aggro deck is dangerous. But you also know who's dangerous? Marcio Carvalho, who again knows what it takes to kind of stand in there and just deliver a strike and end up finishing out this semifinal and moving on to the finals. A man on a mission. He has pure vengeance coursing through his veins to end up beating Quintonoli and moving on. But we don't play it on paper, metaphorically speaking. We play it at the table. And with Quintonoli being on the play, it's going to be an uphill battle already for Marcio. But Marcio catches a break. Quinn actually mulligans to 5 in game 1. And Marcio is able to steal game 1, breaking serve. That is absolutely massive. Because Marcio was going to have to do it, so why not do it right off the rip in the first game? And you're almost playing with house money at this point. They play a very close game 2, but Quinn ends up taking it down. Game 3, Marcio. Game 4, Quinn. Game 5, Quinn on the draw. And I tell you what, it was back and forth, back and forth. You didn't know really which way it was going to go. Was Marcio's experience going to help carry him to the finish line? Or was Quinn just going to be too much, too aggressive, coming from too many different angles for Marcio to be able to handle it? And Marcio having another disappointing tournament and coming up just short of the ultimate goal in which he set out for at the beginning of this tournament. Well, when the dust finally settled and the last spell was slung, Marcio Carvalho triumphs over probably what's considered maybe a bad matchup, I would think, breaking serve against the mono red deck in game 1 and riding it to a 3-2 victory, a thrilling semifinal. Absolutely awesome to watch. Just 2 players playing at a very high level, throwing haymaker after haymaker, getting towards the final round. Like, one of them's got to knock out the other one because they don't know who's going to win the fight if it comes down to a decision. They're trying to go for the knockout blow, and Marcio was able to throw the last punch and knock Quinn out of the tournament and set himself up for his 3rd world final and looking for a potentially first world championship. If Marcio could have converted on the other 2, albeit beating Brian Bronduin and Paulo Vitor Damarosa, we could be looking at a 3-time potential world champion. As it stands, Marcio has not won one, but he has set himself up to win in his 3rd finals appearance. We can't figure out who his opponent is, though. And honestly, I don't know if I'd want to be Marcio. I don't know who I'd want to be. And quite frankly, I don't know if I'd want to be either of these players here. Seth Manfield, Javier Dominguez, Dimir Demons versus Golgari Ramp. Now, this Golgari Ramp deck, we didn't really touch on it too much in the quarterfinals, but this Golgari Ramp deck essentially plays a little bit like a bigger Golgari deck, getting to play things like Virtue of Persistence to be able to bring back creatures from the graveyard. They don't come back with finality counters, so even if your opponent just, ends up using Go for the Throat on your Overlord of the Hauntwoods, guess what? Your next upkeep, boom, the Overlord's going to come back. You're going to be able to get an Everywhere token. You're just going to kind of get the mana advantage. And that's kind of where this deck ends up snowballing. And we saw in some of the matches here where there was just Overlord of the Hauntwoods constantly coming into play, attacking, creating a land every turn, hitting your land drops. Eventually, you just have like 20, 25 mana on the battlefield. A little bit of an exaggeration, but you have as much mana as you need to potentially do anything and just be able to multi-spell with any variety of big spells that you have in your deck, where your opponent maybe gets to play 1 or 2 spells, but they're usually following it up with, like, say, a Archfiend of the Dross and a removal spell. where you're able to then kind of negate that removal spell by just bringing the creature back altogether, and then slamming your own Haymaker, and then another one, and then on top of that too, getting to draw cards from your Up the Beanstalk from playing these Overlord of the Hauntwoods. Ideal curve, turn 2 Beans, turn 3 Impending and Overlord. You end up drawing a card, you get your 4th mana in play. You get to that all-important 5 mana where you can cast another Overlord, triggering Up the Beanstalk, or kind of unlocking any of your other plays to then kind of get to that all-important mid to late game where you're just going to absolutely take over with your spells. But Javier's got a secret. He's got a trick. Javier has that dog in him. Because let me tell you, Javier is not going to go down without a fight. These are 2 titans, 2 juggernauts going into battle head to head to decide not only who's going to book their trip to the finals of the World Championship, have to play against a very inspired Marcio Carvalho, locked in, if you will. They also decide Player of the Year. The Player of the Year award, which we had talked about all weekend leading up to this, or we talked about all week leading up to this weekend, that it felt like it was Simon Nielsen's award to lose. He lost it, and now the 2 players fighting over this award clash in the semifinals. And I tell you what, it looked like it was going to be one of the most anticlimactic Player of the Year finishes, because Seth raced to a 2-0 lead in this matchup. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't care who you are, Seth Manfield and maybe like 2 or 3 other players, I would consider like, yeah, this is over. Like up 2-0 on Javier Dominguez, there's like very few players where I'm like confident that like Javier couldn't reverse sweep. If you're up 2-0 on Javier, like I'm doubling down even more that Javier is going to win, because I think that he just decided to take a nap and, you know, like just ended up like using all of his timeouts and everything, and the game auto conceded for him. Like that's how much confidence I have in Javier to win this. But this is tough. This is a Seth Manfield that's been playing great all year, playing great all tournament, has not lost in the Swiss, you know, cruised to the number 1 seed. It made it look easy the whole weekend. And now he's up 2-0, 1 win away from Player of the Year, 1 win away from making the finals and becoming just the second 2-time champion. Having the chance to, anyway. But again, we're talking about Javier Dominguez, a former world champion in his own right. Nothing worse than a top 10 finish in any premier event. Doesn't matter how many haymakers Seth Manfield throws. Because if you knock down Javier, you knock him down 5 times, he gets up 6 times. That's what's going on right now. Javier refuses to go away. Wins the game on the play. It's 2-1. But now you got to win back-to-back games on the draw. And in a matchup where, yeah, it might go long enough, and maybe being on the draw is a little bit better than being on the play, you know, where Seth Manfield's at least, you know, potentially going to have 2 different chances where maybe if he feels like, you know what, maybe this matchup is better on the draw, I'm not going to take the play in, you know, I'm going to take the play in game 4, and then if I end up losing, I'm going to take the draw in game 5. Could be what happens. But it's not what happened. Seth Manfield, who was up 2-0, now has his back against the wall. Javier gets a little bit of momentum going. Won game 3, goes in, wins game 4 in dramatic fashion. And we head to game 5. Let me tell you, Javier is a cold-blooded killer. Absolutely. There's no way that you can tell me that in that ritual chamber, not only did he make a 6/6 demon with it, but he made a deal with the devil himself. His own demons, whatever the case may be. Because he said, I am not going to be denied. Even if Seth Manfield has me against the ropes, down 2-0, semifinals, Player of the Year on the line, Javier does not shake, he does not quiver, he stands up, he stands taller, puffs out his chest, and says, I'm not going down without a fight, Seth Manfield. You're not only going to have to earn the Player of the Year, you're not only going to have to earn your finals appearance in this World Championship. I'm going to make sure that you're just absolutely exhausted. I'm going to give you one hell of a fight. Javier sure as hell did, pushing it to a game 5 after being down 2-0 to the player that was the number 1 seed in the tournament, absolutely dominating Standard all weekend. And in game 5, it wasn't even close. Both players, haymaker after haymaker, stepping into punches, just absolutely tearing each other up, beating each other up. Set up an improbable world final. An absolute masterclass, a beauty of a match. If there is only one match that you watch from this entire World Championship, it should be the semifinal of two of the greatest players currently playing Magic right now, going toe-to-toe with so much on the line. And what happened? Javier completes the reverse sweep. Down 2-0 to Seth Manfield in the semifinals. Seth, one win away, capturing Player of the Year, being one of the players to have a chance to run it back and win another world title. Has it snatched away. Simon had his Player of the Year trophy snatched away from Javier, and Javier took away the trophy from Seth Manfield as well, winning his match 3-2 and concluding one of the most exciting semifinals we've ever seen, period, point blank, setting up a finals where we have Javier Dominguez versus Marcio Carvalho. Javier and Marcio both know what it's like to lose in the finals of a world championship. Javier losing to William Huey Jensen, who currently is the leader of the organized play and setting up all of the stuff that we have now and continuing to expand on further in the future. That's the player he lost to in the finals and then ended up coming back and winning the next year. Marcio Carvalho losing to BBD, losing to Paulo Vitor Rosa, a very, very, very decorated player in his own right. And I don't think anyone really blames Marcio, who, is a very, very great player in his own right, for losing to either of those players. But it doesn't matter. Nobody remembers who got second place, except for me, because I absolutely love watching these events, and it's kind of great watching all this stuff kind of unfold and the storylines that kind of go deeper than just the surface level. But between these two players, 4 World Finals appearances, now making it 6 between the two because now they face off against each other, with the potential for one of them to either win their first title or the other one to be a repeat champion. Javier wins, he gets his second card, his second World Championship card, his likeness on another card. Marcio, who through blood, sweat, and tears, clawed, scratched his way to the finals. These matchups not being easy, ladies and gentlemen. All to culminate in this one moment where history is going to be made. There's going to be one player that is remembered throughout the history of Magic. I'm not going to say nobody necessarily cares about being a Pro Tour champion, because being a Pro Tour champion does mean something. But when you tell somebody you're a world champion, it doesn't even matter if it's napkin folding. You respect a world champion. You understand what it means when someone says that they're a world champion. One of these players has the opportunity to tell people, yeah, I did it twice. The other one can finally claim that they have climbed the mountain to get to the top and has stood above everybody else that has been in their way, and finally conquering those demons to make it and become a world champion. So what happens? Javier Dominguez, Dimir Demons, Marcio Carvalho, Gogori midrange. I tell you what, we thought that the semifinals was going to be relatively anticlimactic. And unfortunately, just like Hop Fam against Javier Dominguez, making just a misstep in just making very tiny micro mistakes that when you're playing against one of the best players in the world, those micro mistakes feel like boulders crushing your shoulders. Just any way that you just make the tiniest misstep and you get maximum punished. Like you just basically thrown the game away. And unfortunately, a story like this only has a happy ending for one player. Javier, going into the finals, Player of the Year, won't mean anything to him if he loses in the finals. Marcio Carvalho, a very decorated career, a very, very, very great player. Even losing in the finals twice to a world championship, he's going to be in a spot that like the top 0.01% of Magic players will ever reach. Being in a third finals, I don't even know if there's anybody else that has more World's final appearances than Marcio Carvalho. One of one here. Like I said, the story ends in heartbreak. Javier just gets it all. Wins 3-0, breaks out the brooms, sweeps Marcio, denies Marcio that just euphoric moment of, I've been here so many times. It's time for me to be the person, holding the trophy. But instead, is the groomsman, never the groom. Javier Dominguez becomes just the second player in Magic history to be a two-time world champion. And I believe, I don't know how accurate this statement would be, but I believe also being the second player, or the only player to have his likeness on two different Magic cards. That is absolutely insane. Marcio has, from start to finish of this tournament, found ways to win, and after a brutal battle in the semifinals, ripping away the Player of the Year trophy, getting to the semifinals, reverse sweeping Seth Manfield, and then coming in and sweeping Marcio Carvalho to become the World Magic Champion for 2024. Two-time World Champion, Player of the Year, just an absolute all-time from Javier. And probably, where we talked about Simon Nielsen potentially winning Player of the Year and a World Championship and all the accomplishments that he had racked up over the last few years, potentially him being in the conversation as some of the greatest players of all time. Well, Javier decided to flip the script and say, hey, I should be in that conversation. And we can have that conversation at a different point. But Javier is playing probably some of the best Magic that he's ever played. And congratulations to him on becoming a world champion. Unfortunately for Marcio, have to wait like another year to potentially become a world champion. But with the level he plays at and the preparation and everything, it's only a matter of time before Marcio actually breaks in and wins a world championship. And I believe that. So what are our final thoughts of World Championship 30? Well, the event was awesome. I absolutely loved everything from start to finish. The coverage, the matches, of course, always at a high level. You can learn so much from watching some of the best players in the world play Magic. And just overall, everything was great from the World Championship. Some of the announcements from the World Championship about competitive play were absolutely amazing. Everything about it was awesome. Like, I honestly can never get enough of this coverage. That's why I wish and I really want, these Grand Prix style events, these showcase events, to have coverage, because this is where I think it's easier for a lot of players, myself included, to kind of stay in the loop. We have like the weekly Magics, we have all this other things going on, but I really want to get to these showcase events. I want to see some of the best players in the world going to these tournaments and playing in them and showing off their stuff, and of course seeing some up and coming players, make their mark on Magic history. This was an amazing World Championship. All the drama was there. Everything that we could have wanted from a World Championship top 8, we absolutely got. Like I said, short of Kai Buddha actually winning the event, I don't think you could have drawn it up any better. We had the drama and everything in every round. The semifinals, Marcio, can he get back to the finals? Seth Manfield versus Javier Dominguez. Who's going to win Player of the Year between these two players? Getting to the finals, Marcio versus whoever. Like, there's a chance for a two-time champion, regardless of who wins between Javier and Seth Manfield. Or is Marcio finally going to take home his first world championship, and could potentially be more in the future? Because again, he's a player that really steps it up when it comes to the world championship and ends up just blowing everybody else out of the water. In the end, World Championship ends in, excitement, and it also ends in heartbreak. And I cannot wait to see what next season brings us in the road to the World Championship 31. Thank you all for watching the video. I hope you all enjoyed the recap. Boy, this was something. I implore you to watch any of the matches from it. I guarantee you, if you can at least look at it like analytically and kind of understand what is going on, I guarantee you're going to become a better player watching these players play, and just ends up opening the door for yourself to improve as a player. So thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. If you made it this far, please click the subscribe button, like button, all that fun stuff. Helps out in the algorithm. Leave in the comments down below your favorite moment from the World Championship. And it's going to do it for me. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope to see you all in the next one.